We heard in our report Professor Timothy Wu referred to the Tony Soprano rules of capitalism.
If you look at the issue, I think it's more the robber baron model of business. If you go back and look at what the railroads try to do, the railroads said, hey, we want to be shippers too. We don't want to just provide moving cars. And they began to discriminate. They would charge one shipper more than another shipper for the same product over the same distance. Why? Because they had an ownership interest in shipper A, and they didn't in shipper B. Towns were getting strangled by this discrimination. Rockefeller was putting all of his competition in the oil business out because oil used to move by rail in the old days, not pipeline. And so this was a model of the robber barons of the late 19th century, and our society, unlike many other capitalist societies, said, no, we're not going to have it. We passed the antitrust laws to break up the trusts, and we passed the Interstate Commerce Act to say common carriage. These systems are so important to the flow of goods, and in the case of information democracy, that they have to be operated on a non-discriminatory basis. Fundamental principle that in the information age, if you think about how ironic it is, now we have the merging of communications and commerce, of speech and commercial activity. And now when the need for open non-discriminatory networks is more important than ever, we do an about-face and abandon what was a fundamental and very, very productive principle for us.
Yale PhD, Fulbright Fellow, Stanford University, consumer, the heart of American society. You're no radical, right, on this?
No, I am a devout capitalist, but I firmly believe that there are some principles. And if you look back at our history, it was the reaffirmation of the commitment to an open society and an open, real competition. You know, we said we're not going to let these cartels dominate our society. So sometimes you need government to think of good ideas, to impose principles and restraint on the capitalist sector. In our economy, and you had it in your piece, 80% of the telephone service and electricity service in America is provided by private companies subject to public obligations. That's our model. It's a darn good model.
Mark Cooper, Consumer Federation of America, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
As you just heard, the heart of this debate is whether the concentration of media ownership serves democracy, diversity, and the First Amendment. More is at stake than the Internet. Even as we speak, the Federal Communications Commission is thinking of changing the rules to allow a single corporation to own, in one market, the major daily newspaper, as well as up to 8 radio stations and 3 television stations. And with the coming of digital broadcasting that enables one station to broadcast several signals, it's conceivable that a dozen or more television channels in one city could be controlled by one company. 2 weeks ago in Los Angeles, the FCC held the first of several public hearings on these proposed changes.
Thank you for being here. It's an exercise in tightening our democracy. I look forward to the testimonies of the witnesses and the public comments we're here to see, so thank you so much.
Now we're back at square one, and it's all up for grabs. And if we're going to do a better job this time around, it's going to be because of input from folks like you.
The big turnout included many folks from LA's creative community who said that media conglomeration is stifling local coverage of the news and the diversity of opinion and voices. Let's listen to a medley of citizens who attended the hearings, as captured by the PBS team at Now.
How do you expect these corporations to give us a diversity of opinion if they can't even give the marketplace a diversity of programs?
There's no public benefit to allowing them to have more stations. It will drive me out of business. I want to stay in business and serve the public.
The airwaves belong to the American people, and we believe it's time for them to take it back.
We must ask the question, is American radio better today than it was 10 years ago? That was the answer. Media consolidation has, without question, harmed localism in radio.
You have the keys to communication in your hands. You are responsible for whether we hear what's going on in this country right now.
One of the people at that hearing in Los Angeles is with me now. Eric Kleinenberg is a scholar at New York University and the author of Fighting for Air, the Battle to Control America's Media, to be published in January. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Why the title, Fighting for Air?
Well, there is a kind of war going on around the United States today. It's a battle of citizens who are fed up with what's happened to their local media, their radio stations, their television, their newspapers, and they're battling to assert control. 10 years ago, the FCC and Congress relaxed the ownership rules, allowed a small number of companies to own more and more media outlets than ever before. And I think most people know what's happened to their media by listening to the radio or not. It used to be the case that no radio company could own more than 2 AM and FM stations in any one market. Today, they own up to 8 and are trying to get 10 or 12. What's happened is that they turned those radio stations from valuable local community assets, places where you could go to get local news, reporting about your institutions, your local music, into places that played pre-programmed content. And the result is that people turn the stations off.
Everywhere I travel, people say we've lost our local radio station. Yeah. There's no local news here. There's not even in the local personality zone anymore. But when the internet appeared almost out of nowhere a dozen years ago, people said, oh, well, the internet will solve the problem of the paucity or lack of information from radio and local television. Has the internet done that?
The internet is an incredible medium, and it's about to become even more powerful, more incredible, because radio, television, newspapers, movies, all of these things will be available to Americans through the internet. Unfortunately, what the internet has not added is local content. The internet gives us a world of information about the world. You can get British and French newspapers like never before. But your viewers should ask themselves, how much local radio is actually available? How much local broadcast content? How much local reporting that's not already available in other outlets comes through the internet? And the answer is incredibly little. It's just not the solution for the problem of local media.
I want to show you a report that really drives home what you're saying. This was prepared after Katrina by Peter Bull and Rick Carr, my colleagues who produced the piece on the internet. It comes to us from the Gulf Coast of Mississippi. Let's look at it.
Local media can mean the difference between life and death. Take the example of Hancock County, Mississippi on the Gulf Coast. Its 2 local commercial radio stations went off the air after consolidation changed the rules of the radio business. A local volunteer launched a community FM station, the only broadcaster in the county. And then Hurricane Katrina hit.
This is WQRZ LP 103.5 FM. Stay tuned for a public bulletin from the Hancock County Emergency Management Agency. Hancock County has suffered extreme devastation. Any damage assessments have already begun. Available at Bay High. Those are distribution sites for food, water, and ice. Open from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. FEMA has established a family assistance center. Hancock County is under a mandatory curfew. A 25-bed field hospital unit has been...
Radio works. Because in an emergency such as Katrina, people didn't have power. They didn't have portable televisions. Television could not do the job. Radio, almost everyone has a car radio that works.
It was here, 60 miles east of New Orleans, that the most intense part of Katrina made landfall on August 29, 2005. Winds reached 125 miles per hour, and water from the Gulf surged miles inland.
Our number one goal was to make sure that it doesn't matter what programming we run, we're just waiting for the emergency.
This is 103.5 FM, the voice of Bay St. Louis, Waveland.
Bryce Phillips is chief engineer, general manager, and pretty much everything else for WQRZ, a nonprofit low-power FM community radio station that serves the small towns along the Hancock County coast.
That's what this station is designed to do, was to be 24/7, and we were going to build it to where it was survivable by any natural disaster, especially hurricane.
The water got to the point where it was up above our heads where we're standing right now, right?
Well, yeah, it was halfway up that roof.
Thanks to Bryce Phillips, WQRZ managed to stay on the air throughout Katrina and its aftermath, when most of the commercial radio stations in the path of the storm went silent.
I didn't know that all the rest of those stations were out. I had no clue. I think I'm one of 1,000, but I'm just serving my own community. I had no clue that I was one of 4 out of 41 that survived.
Out of 41
radio stations.
Total?
Total.
On the Gulf Coast?
Yes, and into New Orleans.
So 90% of the stations went off the air,
That's
but
correct.
you managed to stay on?
At ground zero.